The first of our speakers this afternoon is somebody who's going to essentially introduce himself to you, and we're going to welcome him to UMass. His name is Ken Udas. He's our new CEO for UMass Online. He's a leader in the field of educational technology, and he's going to be talking to us about the directions that he sees as we move forward from where we are right now. So, Ken Udas?
Thank you, Eleanor. I guess that I feel a little badly because I know everyone has been in sessions, and one of the really nice things about these types of meetings is that we get a chance to chat a little bit and discuss and to talk with the presenters and so on and so forth. And I do feel in some ways as if I'm intruding on that. So I'm going to try to be reasonably direct with the presentation, hopefully opening up to some questions. But beforehand, I'd like to start by thanking the organizing committee and other individuals here at UMass Boston. I have to say that every campus that I've visited, I've been treated with incredible hospitality. And UMass Boston has clearly does the same. It was just wonderful this morning having the opportunity to be here and having the chance to see three of your leaders talk substantively about their vision, about how they see what they see it's important within the academic enterprise here at UMass. That of course being Keith, Winston, and Andrew. I'd like to take a moment too. It's one of the nice things about being here in a little bit later in the day to be able to say, as I speak a little bit, I'd like to say that I have the opportunity to reflect on some of the things that have been said, and I would like to point out one or two things. One of the things that resonated really closely for me that Winston had talked about was the idea of community and the idea of the role of the academy within the community and how that extends into the dialogues we have, how it extends into the creation of civic capacity in the form of civilization. And I thought that it was a wonderful, just sort of off-the-cuff comment that he made. And the idea that what we do has real impact, not only on sort of the economics of our learners and in the lives of our learners, but how they contribute to a larger humane mission and humane task that we all work with. I'd also like to talk a little bit about what Andrew had to say today and some of the things that I found really intriguing. And I'd like us to think a little bit about them as maybe we go through this presentation a bit. And that was in terms of the idea of one of the things that I found very intriguing was the idea of persistent education. He's thinking about this activity as being one of a series of a cohort that will have persistence and will serve in sort of a mentorship and development component for the next cohort. And I find that absolutely fascinating, and I find it that, and what's exciting about it, of course, is this building community thing around something that's very, very important. The last thing that I will mention, and it's a smaller group that had the opportunity to see it, but Peter Taylor, I had a chance to see Peter's presentation a little bit earlier, right before this one. I did not have a chance to stay in and listen to any questions, which I'm sure there were some. But I think that one of the points that he brought up, I found, and he just touched upon it, was the idea of what are the implications of openness. And when he talked about it, he talked a little bit about open source, but he also talked about open processes, open educational resources, and the liberating potential that resides within. And I think that we might want to ask ourselves that also as I step through this presentation. So I'm going to start in just a second. That was a little bit of an introduction. I know you're not supposed to start with an apology, but this is the first time I've used Prezi as a presentation tool. And what I found is while I was developing this sort of presentation, it was very stream of consciousness and so on, and it kind of wound this way and that way and so on. And I don't know if it actually reflects what I'm supposed to be talking about. And, I mean, some of my observations is that there's really no need for there to be, the technology leaders and so on, because everyone who I've heard talk today are technology leaders in education, thought leaders, and so on and so forth. So you don't want to necessarily wear that mantle. You want to be talking about something else that maybe we can all relate to in different ways. The very last thing I want to do, though, is introduce, if you haven't had a chance to see him, he's the newest member of the UMass Online team, Pat Masson, who just joined us last week as our new CTO. And he just waved. Please do take an opportunity, though, to spend some time talking with him, challenge what he has to say, get him worked up. It's all good for everyone. So anyway, I start with a really, really simple question. What does online learning mean for UMass? Once again, you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. This is the first time I've used Prezi, and the first time I've actually done it on a PC. I'm assuming it will all work really nicely. What does online learning mean for UMass? And I think we want to return to this question. By the way, the presentation is mostly questions. And why did we become involved with online learning when so many others did not when we did? You may or you may not be aware of it, but the University of Massachusetts, all 5 campuses are regarded nationally as leaders in online learning and the use of educational technologies within that context. There's absolutely no question about it. You're part of something that is which is phenomenal. We are recognized for excellence in it nationally. And what I'm getting is a few furrowed eyebrows. And I think that it might be that because as we sit inside of a community and we recognize the stuff that's going on and we recognize the potential of what could go on, we frequently humble ourselves because we understand. More frequently when you're in an organization that hasn't shared in that vision, hasn't strived towards excellence, and I'm going to just talk right through those sorts of things. I'm rather liberal with my use of the language, so I pardon myself. But in any event, frequently you don't recognize what the potential is, where you stand, and how much you have to develop from there. So, why did we become involved? And I'm going to start by suggesting that it might have something to do with our mission. And I would like to talk a little bit about what that means. And what I'm going to do is say, I've teased some stuff out. Yeah, I took the time, and this is a little trivial, to actually kind of go through our missions and sort of read them and understand them and try to develop some ideas. Now, I looked at all of ours, the University of Massachusetts mission, UMass Boston, and UMass Online's. And what I kind of found was that there's a consistent theme here. And part of it is that we strive to create affordable, financially sustainable, accessible, high quality, innovative education and research, not surprisingly. Now, why would we do it? What are we doing? It's to advance knowledge, which isn't surprising, right? We're a university. What else would we be doing? I think what's important about this, and I think that this is important because it's the intersection of all 3 of these organizations, is that we're doing it to enhance the quality of life, social capacity, and economic development. It is with purpose. It is not just because we want to advance knowledge. Now, we want to be referring back to some of the questions that are going to be mixing around. And that has to do with, well, what does online learning mean for UMass? We ought to be thinking a little bit about this in terms of those things: financial sustainability, accessibility, high quality, innovation, so on and so forth. And it's for Massachusetts, which we would expect. The United States, the country, and beyond, the globe. So the idea is that we want to extend that mission, have our input, and contribute to a much larger community than that which sits here in Dorchester, that sits in the metropolitan area, Massachusetts, or what have you. I used to speak without an accent, and I can put it on a little bit. And we suspect that online learning is one of the ways to support this mission and our goals. We might ask ourselves, though, why? Why do we think that's the case? Why is online learning and the use of educational technologies important for that? Beyond that, though, is what's holding us back. We recognize there's potential that we're not meeting. We recognize there's still work to do. What are the things that are holding us back? There's about 100 of us in here, And I'm going to guess if we actually took a poll, I know some of you would put down 3 or 4 things, but I bet you there'd be a bunch of folks who'd say the same thing, and then you'd have a whole lot of other answers. Is that there's not one answer to that. There's not one answer to the reasons why we are not as excellent as we might be. We're very good. We might be excellent, but we know that we can be better and we can be doing more. I'm going to suggest for this discussion, that really one of the things that we ought to be thinking a little bit about, it's not, please don't misinterpret this, it is not the poverty of the classroom. It's the poverty of using the classroom as a metaphor for online learning. I think that that is something that we ought to be thinking about. Because at one point, 10, 12, 15 years ago, when we started doing online learning, one of the ways to be able to engage a majority of people on your campus was to be able to talk about, well, what are you doing in the class? How are we going to replicate it? This is our gold standard for excellence and for quality. So how do we kind of convey that over? When I first started teaching online, and it was in '95, it was sort of pre-LMS. It was, we used Majordomo. We used a listserv. And I got my wife worked at a research institute, and I kind of asked if I could get a little bit of space on her server, so we ended up having a little bit of static web content. But it was principally in something that looked distinctly not like a classroom. And I thought that that actually engendered a lot of creativity, because we were working with something that was very different, and we were allowed to break the rules. Now, what I'm going to suggest is that the classroom has never been a very good place to recognize the fact that learning is personal. And I'm going to, and it's deeply personal. It's personal on a lot of levels, right? We know that our students have different aptitudes. They're engaging with us in different ways. They have different levels of commitment. There are personal reasons why they're engaging, and there are different learning styles and ways that we acquire knowledge and contribute to the learning community. And what I would suggest is that, and what I'm going to use to validate that statement, is the ascendance of the personalized learning environment. That is, more and more, probably over the past 3 or 4 years, have we really been talking about and thinking about and reading about why do the environments that we currently work in, why aren't they entirely satisfactory? Why don't they satisfy us? Why is it that our students don't seem to engage in our environments like they engage in other environments? And I would suggest that this is one of the indicators, is that there's this idea of there being a personalized learning environment. And I'd say that this void that has been left is being filled by all sorts of things that we've been talking about. I actually got a ride up the elevator from downstairs from somebody with a key. And what he said, hey, how is it going? And I said, it's been fascinating. I've listened to a number of people. I've asked a question. I did this and that. And my final statement as I was walking out of the elevator is, well, it's a wiki world. And I think that, there's a certain truth to it, is that there are qualities to the wiki which reflect how we like to think of ourselves. We like to think of ourselves as being collaborative, as being able to assimilate and contribute, and to be able to create group knowledge, and to be able to express ourselves, and to be able to correct others and ourselves when we learn more and we want to change what we were saying. We want to be adaptable. And that's really what we're talking about. And the wiki is sort of a good application to sort of think about. But quite clearly, the types of things we're talking about now aren't big enterprise centralized systems. We're talking about flexibility, small tools in open frameworks. We're talking about things that are portable and distributable, and things that are inexpensive, maybe even free. Free in terms of free beer, but free in other ways also. Free to share, free to modify. All of those sorts of things that reduce the barriers that we can feel under traditional circumstances. So anyway, I've sort of hit some of this, but I mean, quite clearly from some of the presentations that I've seen, the idea of collaborative, personal publishing is a big deal. Collaborative authoring is even a bigger deal. Wikis kind of encapsulate that, blogs encapsulate some of that, but all of the other things that we do, media mashups and so on and so forth, are important components to that dialogue also. In addition, this results in what I think is the shared development of community. It's something that's very, very different than what we had traditionally done in our educational experiences, in anything other than a rather abstract way. The co-development of culture. What do we do when we contribute to a Twitter stream? What are we doing when we write on each other's message boards and Facebook? What are we doing when we contribute to something like Wikipedia or some sort of derivation of that? Of course, we're co-developing culture. We're creating artifacts that reflect our current understandings and knowledge and challenge each other. Persistent educational experiences is another, and I just wanted to point to what Andrew was talking about earlier today, and I thought it was absolutely forward-thinking and remarkable. The idea of actually creating sort of class-based alumni that will contribute to each other over numerous years, help support, perhaps even make retention something that's more meaningful on the course level and so on. And once again, this does reflect back to our personal experiences and the reason why learning is personal. And then finally on this, that we take advantage of tools and devices which are used for all sorts of things. Entertainment. The same tools are being used for entertainment, work, our family relations, the development of community, as well as education, both informal and formal. And I think that this is an important point as well. And it's without regard, and I've got this written up here, it's, without regard for audience and application. And what I was saying here is that these tools are used outside of our formal environment. That's usually not true. When we think about the classroom environment, we think about a very different thing than we think about when we think about how we interact with our family, how we interact in our social lives. We're very rarely put ourselves in a situation to be entertained in a classroom. It's a very different thing, and it's the same thing with the dominant learning technologies that exist right now. And I'll point to the LMS as one of them. Folks tend not to gravitate to the LMS to do anything but what they've been assigned to do. These tools not only extend, and I've just said this, they don't only extend the learning environment outside of the classroom, but they bridge the classroom with the rest of the world and the learners' lives. And we can talk a little bit about that. I'm sure that you can reflect on all sorts of examples. And I think that this is a continuum. I mean, I think that one of the things that we know and that was so threatening about online learning and distance education is that it disaggregated the learning environment from the physical campus. That was a threatening thing, and it was a very real thing that online learning and distance education did. I'd ask the question, are the tools that we're talking about now, are they disaggregating the learning environment that our learners are actually participating in from our virtual campus? That is what they're doing actually taking that next step beyond and basically making our virtual environments very, very challenging and challenged. If that is the case, and of course I'm adding assumption on top of assumptions, and if you don't agree with the first one, you're probably not going to agree with this one, but you'll have to bear with me. I've got 20 minutes. Are we then moving from distance education to ubiquitous education? That is, are we actually using the same tools, same processes, and intertwining, mingling, mashing up our life experiences, our family experiences, the experiences that we share in informal education with formal education? Is it a profitable thing to at least consider that education ought to be ubiquitous and we shouldn't think of it as being at a distance just because it's at a distance from the lovely campus here in Dorchester or in Amherst or in Oxford, Ohio, or wherever the learner happens to, their home institution happens to be. And does this mean, and please don't take offense, because I know that lifelong learning is at the heart of a lot of people here, but as institutions, does this mean that we have to pay more than lip service to lifelong learning? That is, if in fact it is ubiquitous, do we have to understand what that really means? If so, and this is a fake number, what is the role of the university? What are our roles with our learners for the 99.5% of the time that a learner isn't actually in one of our classes? Now, that's a fake number. It might be a lot less, a lot little. I don't know. But I think most of us would agree that even for the most studious learner, I've got 4 degrees, I still spend more time out of class than in class. And what does that mean for us if we suggest that the whole thing is there? And is the 0.5%, once again, that's fabricated, enough for us to do all the wonderful things that we say are part of our mission? These things. That is, by just looking at the learner during that period of time where we have them in the formal classroom Is that enough for us to actually do these things? Enhance quality of life, substantively, social capacity, and economic development? And even if it is, even if we think of ourselves as being a catalyst, as being a lever, as being all sorts of things, is it as much as we could be doing? I guess that it's probably not, and I think that it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for us, for universities that engage in the human experience, that have those objectives, whose actions and outcomes are real, are ground not only in theory, but in practice and in the real quality of how people experience and how they contribute to our greater society. Now, if we're not going to be passive, if we're going to be catalysts, what should we do, and what should our institutions do? What do you think our students are going to ask us to do? And finally, how do we intend to respond? Is it important? I think that that's the end of this. But I'm very, very happy. Did I run out of time? So I don't know, and actually y'all were, I don't know, I hope that I didn't keep you from eating, but I thank you for your attentiveness. That was fantastic. Do we have enough time for any sort of dialogue or questions or anything like that? Yeah, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I don't have any of the answers to these questions. So you can expect a return question. Kitty. And one of the, I don't know if you heard Kitty, but she was really sort of asking, sort of iterating the question. She was basically saying, yeah, it was a nice summary, that basically what we're talking about is that there are tools and sort of aptitudes and sort of an evolution that has sort of gotten us to be thinking, if we're observing it, that yeah, there's a whole lot of bridging between what we do and what students do outside of our classrooms. And what does that mean for us? How do we respond? And so on. And I think that the question is, I think that really kind of one of the points is that our learners have already responded. I know that, and this isn't a learning situation, but I used to work at Penn State. I worked at the World Campus for about around 3 years. And we used to do these, and I felt badly. It was quarterly. It was kind of painful. The staff at the World Campus that reported directly up through the World Campus was about 170 folks. And then we had another 50 or 60 people in the building who worked exclusively for the World Campus. So we would call everyone together, and we would do some nice community building type things. But one of the things that I would do is a lot of the people who were in this group, they were friends, and I was following them on Twitter and so on. Right after the meeting, I'd go and I'd check the stream to see what people had to say. You know, sometimes it was about my tie that didn't match, but usually it was something substantive. So where I'm going with it is that I fully recognize, and you know, there's that type of example, but there's also other types of examples in terms of. I found myself doing this more recently. You have a chance to select the people who are very, very interesting to you to follow, right? And I've found that 9 times out of the 10, the things that I read nowadays, and please, I don't know if this makes me a heathen or something, but or a charlatan. 9 times out of 10, what I read is what the people who I care about tell me I ought to be reading. It's these links that I get, and what it does is it allows me to kind of have a barometer. I mean, I only follow people who I think are smarter than me, right? And no, what I'm saying is, and there's a lot of them. I'm following hundreds and hundreds of people. And it's one of those things, you always want to surround yourself with people who are a lot smarter than you. And so what that does is it consistently keeps the stream of fresh thoughts, creativity coming right directly to me. And then they recommend somebody else. And then I say, well, if it's someone who's smarter than me is recommending someone else, they must be smarter than me too. So I follow them. Where I'm going is that there's a fundamentally different way that I now decide what's important to follow than 5 years ago, where I was out, I'd be out, I don't know, I might read something, and I still do read the Chronicle, and I read articles that are important. But it's the balance has shifted incredibly. So I'm assuming if I'm doing it, and most of my students I found are brighter than me as well, that they're doing it also. And so I don't know what resources I can provide them other than some confidence and creating an environment that allows them to be able to integrate these things and bring them to the formal learning environment and bridge it with the rest of their lives for relevance sake. So I think where I'm going with it is that, and I just yarned on, my thought is that it's happening, and it's a matter of, are we attentive enough to sort of realize it and then do something with it? What's the role of learning design in an incredibly abstract, remote, distributed, community-based environment in which traditional rules around pedagogy might not apply the same way that they do in how we look at classrooms or online classrooms? Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, our next speakers for the lunchtime keynote are Malcom Smuts and Cheryl Nixon and Lisa Link and Bandhavi, who's a graduate student who's been assisting on the project. Cheryl Nixon is a colleague of mine in the English department. Malcom Smuts is a long-term colleague from the history department. And of course, I'm always very excited as I see my colleagues doing interesting things with technology. And I just fell in love with this project when I learned about it. And I've been kind of paying attention to it over the last couple of years. And I'm amazed at how far it's come. And so they are going to show you this absolutely wonderful website that they've created and talk about their work. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about what they're doing is that they really are not only creating a new learning environment for their students, but also a new way of introducing students to scholarship and really conceptualizing, and I think in the long run, what's helping us to conceptualize what scholarship might look like in a digital age. And I might be pushing them farther than they want to be pushed when I say that, but that's my agenda. Here they are.
Okay, I'm going to lead off and then turn it over to my colleagues. This is a grand experiment, and it started as a gleam in our eyes a number of years ago when we read the call for applications from the President's Office for educational technology projects. I'd been talking to several of my colleagues in English, especially Cheryl, for a long time about how fun it would be to teach a team-taught interdisciplinary course. And when I read this call for proposals, I thought, well, maybe we could design a website that would go with such a course, and especially a course on this period, the late 17th, early 18th century, which is a period that often falls through the cracks in both English and history departments. And when it is taught, it's often taught in a fragmented way. You'll get a course on Milton, who's in the period, or on Restoration drama, or on satire, or on the rise of the novel, but rarely on all of them together, holistically in their historical background, though, of course, they were all intertwined. One of the things that makes this period challenging for a historian or a literary scholar is that so much of the literature in it was performative and interactive rather than simply meant to be read as words on a page. Drama, sermons, songs. Even if it was meant to be read, often it was read and discussed and consumed in social contexts. Coffee houses, for example. Well, like that one on the screen. But of course, students And all of us, to some extent, have to approach the period in terms of words on pages because that's what's left. And our formal training tends to reinforce that very textual approach. So one of the questions is, how do you get people to think beyond this training and the structures that they're confronting to sort of reconstruct the dynamism of a culture that was not just about writing and reading, but about talking, speaking, singing, visual imagery, and all of that intertwined with politics and with a concrete urban environment. So the idea was to use a website as a tool to begin to get students to think in those terms because of the nature of the site and because of the challenge of using this new media, which is different, of course, from the kinds of writings that students are normally taught to do, to get them to think about, how these different processes work. So we got the grant, we set to work, and we had marvelous help from our colleagues in IT. I can't say enough about the contributions of Lisa Link and Bandhavi in the design of the site, in getting us up to speed. We were all technological dunces at the beginning in finding us software. And the result is that it turned out to be, I think, a bigger site and a more professional-looking site than any of us imagined it would be at the beginning. So what we did was to develop a number of pages around different aspects of the period. Geography, basic maps, different parts of London. What did they look like? What were they like? How did they develop? Here, a color-coded map showing the original in blue, the original medieval city, in red, the 17th century city, and then the full map is the mid-18th century city. And then individual parts of London illustrated with topographical engravings. You get great visual material from this period that we can use. Pictures of particular landmarks as they would have looked in the 17th century. Thematic geography, not just about particular areas, but what space meant to people, how people used it, moved around in it, things like parks, open spaces, or social topography and housing. Where did people live? How were the rich neighborhoods related to the poor neighborhoods? What did the houses look like? So we've got a number of pictures illustrating housing types. Here, one of the characteristics of older London neighborhoods is that you tended to have wealthy houses on main streets and then back alleys of poor houses right next to them. In the 17th century, you start to get the development of a different kind of elite residential neighborhood with open backyards and lots of space. Here in this engraving, you can see the two closely juxtaposed to each other, and the contrast between that, for example, and here. So the visual medium is very useful in making the larger point. Go back up. Episodes, things like the Restoration, where the monarchy comes back after a civil war, and we have pictures of the king's procession into London. Themes, things like religion. Now, Lisa found for us a program to help out with the geography that allows us to use Google Map tools, but to superimpose them on historical maps of the period. So we can pull these up, we can enlarge, we can move around, and we can put markers on them. In this case, we're showing parks and palaces of the royal court to give students a sense of its distribution in space. And we can link to a slightly different map that shows it even more. Okay, so you have aristocratic neighborhoods. The little houses are the houses of noblemen, and then we have a different kind of marker for royal palaces. And in some cases, you can click on them and you get a little thumbnail sketch. In a few cases, well, in several cases. The website is really a marvelous tool for exploring certain features of the period. For example, there's a lot of hostility to Catholicism in England in this period. There's this wonderful series of playing cards at Yale University illustrating a bogus popish plot of 1681. So here you get the Pope sitting with his cardinals plotting to assassinate the King of England. If we go back to the gallery, we've got a whole series of these. I won't bother to find them now, but they're all in there, you know, people lurking in the bushes. The New Exchange, or the Exchange in London, the stock market, big open courtyard. What would happen is, I don't know if you can see that, but people trading in different commodities and areas would gather in customary places. So we've got the diagram there. And then we've got this picture, which shows the groups actually meeting. So you can go from the diagram to, you know, what it would actually have looked like. As a teaching tool, we found this to be helpful in a couple of contexts. One of them is that one of the challenges of teaching, the 17th century especially, is that it's got a literature and indeed a culture that's really embedded in the ancient world, lots of allusions to kinds of texts that students don't know much about, allegory. At the same time, there's a juicy interest in scandal, and the two often play off against each other. Okay, the problem is that if you're coming cold to this sort of thing, you have to decipher the classical allusions, and then you don't necessarily have the background detail to catch all of the allusions to the illicit sexual affairs and the other things that people are talking about. But you can, using a website, at least show how similar things are also going on in the visual area. Here, for example, one of the triumphal arches created for the king at his return to London, and we had a text that goes with it that sort of explains how it's constructed. But then there's also an interesting document printed in the 17th century. Oh, what happened there? I want to get back to my website. I may not be able to pull it up, but there was a riot against the brothels of London. And right after this riot, a printed document appeared that purported to be a petition of the poor whores of London to the king's chief mistress, appealing to her to use her influence with the crown to protect this vital occupation that was being assaulted by these Puritan killjoys of London, right? And you know, we could pull up the images on the screen and then pull up the poor whores petition right in class, have the students sort of look at both, compare the two. Or finally, last example, and here I should say in passing that this thing has grown to over 65 pages. We've got 250 entries in the image gallery. Now, many of them are duplicates, smaller and larger versions of the same picture, but over 100 pictures. 11 student pages that I'm going to show you in a moment, and 3 ballads, which we had recorded through the director of the Early Modern Music Program out at UMass Amherst. And one of the pages where all of this comes together is one discussing Covent Garden, and it illustrates one other feature of the period, which is that this is a period in which concepts of gentility and politeness are developing, but it's also got a seamy underside, and often the boundary between the high, polite, polished culture and the seamy underside is very permeable. So, okay, Covent Garden develops in the 1630s as the most fashionable neighborhood of London in the time. We've got a description of it. We've got pictures. We're able to embed little documents. You can click on them. Here, for example, a document showing that Charles I of England actually modified the plans to the new Covent Garden Piazza as they were being made. But Covent Garden, although it's a rich neighborhood, also quickly develops a reputation as a place of ladies of the night. And that gets picked up in literature. So if we scroll down a little bit, we've got here a bit of dialogue from a play about Covent Garden of the 1630s. I don't know if you can see it, but a very sort of bawdy, double entendre about women admiring the new buildings and calling them fair erections. And then a set of court depositions from the same period complaining about prostitution. And the second one, for example, is a man who was very annoyed because he lived next door to a brothel. People kept getting the address mixed up and hassling his wife, so he's complaining to the authorities. It's something I picked out of London archives a while ago. And then it continues to develop. By the late 17th century, it's slightly less fashionable as a living neighborhood, but it's a center of the theater, of art auctions, of coffee houses that cater to the literati. But there's also a coffee house that is portrayed by Hogarth, if I can find where, in one of his prints. That's a sort of center of London lowlife, prostitution, people coming in off the streets. Right in the middle, there it is, right next to the Covent Garden Church. It's run by a woman named Malcom, and she and her coffee house are also known for a kind of plebeian slang that develops in this period. So here we have an image from the Yale Center of British Art that we procured of Malcom, and beneath her a sample of this dialogue. Some of the words are still familiar. For example, to hike means to leave. A pad is a bed. The term for a loose woman in this dialogue is a buttock, which is sort of fun. And then we also found a ballad. And I'm going to play it for you and show the lyrics. I don't know how audible it will be, but notice also the quality of this recording. I mean, really happy with what the guys out in the Pioneer Valley did. It's a ballad that purports to be the complaints of the honest poor whores of the East End of London against the elegant women in the West End coffee houses.
With your devil's command, a wine to the sin of fornication. Sobriety cloaks your lust with a pox, while we deal more plainly like honester fox. Although we can hardly keep open our doors, for all we maintain the perfectest whores in the nation.
So it goes on like that with, these sort of juicy verses about getting an abortion and getting your virginity restored and, all of this sort of stuff until finally the East End people threaten to go on strike and close up shop if the gentlemen don't stop deserting them for these West End coffee houses. So it's a rich combination and very good background for a novel like Moll Flanders, which we used at the end of the course. And then finally, in the course, we divided the students into teams, though some preferred to work on their own, and made each of them design their own little web page. Now, we didn't have them put it up on the site. We had them do it as a Word file with pictures, but then we would load up the pages. And we now have about 11 of these on various subjects: crime in London, cuckolds and shaming rituals, where the student found links to some ballads about London cuckolds in the 17th century. We're still putting these up because they came in fairly recently. Let me find this one. But this is one where it came in early enough that we were actually able to find some pictures for it and procure them. We talked in the class about scribal publication, that is the distribution of literature not through print but through hand copying and distribution. And a couple of the students got very interested in the mechanics of this thing, so they researched it, did a page, talked about the different kinds of handwriting, and I happen to have a sample of English secretary hand, an unusual hand today, very common at the time. And they found this handwriting manual of the late 16th century, and I was able to get reproductions of a couple of the illustrations. So here, for example, is a diagram about how to hold and how not to hold a pen from the late 16th century. Good on the left, not on the right. or to look at just a couple of others, and I'll turn the floor over to my colleagues. Theatrical media. For some reason, lots of the students seem to want to work on about projects about sex on the Restoration stage. Surprise, surprise. So here are women on stage with a couple of the famous actresses of the period. Good long discussion. Another group did one on the sort of mechanics of the stage. And finally, one of my favorite pages, one of the students got very interested in China, the importation of China, the use of China as a metaphor, and did this nice page beginning on the trade with the Orient, the new goods being brought in. She found a link to Indian calico, put it on her page, found these examples of different kinds of blue and white Ming Dynasty China coming in, a kind of China made in China, but incorporating Western coats of arms, so it was manufactured for the Western audience. And this one was on the website of a Boston gallery, and they gave us permission to download it and include it. Different style that develops in the 18th century, China figurines, and then finally, I found this section of a Hogarth painting showing China figurines on a mantelpiece in the 18th century to sort of complete the series. And it's a very, this one in particular is a very sophisticated page. It starts with a sort of economic history of the importation, discusses in just enough detail the different kinds of China, and then has some very good examples of the use of China as a metaphor, especially for feminine chastity and the fertility of chastity, and then concludes with a little piece about how historians looking at inventories have concluded that China was not a particularly feminine object. Men collected it just as much as women in the period. So, you know, nice balanced presentation, a real addition to the site, entirely done by one student. So, Cheryl, do you want to talk a little bit more about the course or?
I think we'll try to do it from here. Is there a way to turn this on? Is it on? Okay, can you hear me? Oh, good. All right, so I'll talk for a few minutes. So I team taught the course with Malcolm, and we just finished the class on Monday night. So this is very fresh in our minds, and that many of the students were just completing their websites. Now I think we have some interesting things to tell you if we had been able to read the student evaluations of the course. So we're waiting, we have to get their final grades done, and then we'll read their evaluations, and we'll be able to see how they express what sort of impact this type of work had on their work in the course. But anecdotally, and I think from our own sense of how it worked, we felt that the website project really added so many dimensions to the type of work that typically happens in a class. I think with Malcolm just being able to show you somewhat quickly a few of these sites that the students created, you can get a sense of how in a very short amount of time, one semester, they moved from knowing very little about the time period to moving into a realm of expertise where they're publishing, in a way, in a very public forum, ideas that they went out and researched themselves. We did not assign them the topics, they came up with the topics themselves. And the topics came out of course material, but it was a way of encapsulating, I think, what we think all students should be doing, which is learning something in a course and then taking it in a new self-defined direction. So they were getting the background from us, but then able to use the website as a way to explore something they really enjoyed, such as maybe women's sexuality, but take it in a very scholarly direction. So I wanted to just say a couple of quick comments about the student side of how this worked in the course and what we felt it was doing in the course from sort of a pedagogy standpoint. And then I really want to hand it over to the people who were really behind the scenes making this all happen. Yeah, fully there doing it. And I really have to give many, many rounds of applause to Malcolm as being the real energy behind this, because I think in order to get something this sophisticated going, you really need one person who is very dedicated to learning how to make it work and sort of doing the trial and error before it can be rolled out in a course. And when Malcolm and I were just talking before we came up here, that this process has taken us a few years to get the website underway before it then landed in our course this past semester. So there's a couple of years of hard work really on Malcolm's part behind this. Yeah, and the IT people really did the work. And we were able to then, as I said, just roll it out this semester. So I wanted to take a minute or two to highlight 3 key things that I felt this type of work did for our classroom. The first is, as Malcolm was indicating, the students were really engaging in the material of the classroom in a much more multimedia way. And I think that one of the major issues Malcolm and I talked about with this course is that is where the latest scholarship is for this time period. The latest scholarship is saying late 17th, early 18th century is a multimedia time period. It's about, just as Malcolm was showing us, the ballads. It's about sort of cheap print that we normally might not have read 20 years ago or so. It's about people being on the stage at the same time they walk off of the stage and out into the street and buy a copy of one of the ballads they might have just heard. They buy a pamphlet, maybe about a political event that they're talking about with their friends. We wanted to capture that idea of that's the latest scholarship of this time period, is trying to work through those materials. We wanted this course to capture that for the students. So obviously the website is a perfect way to do that, and obviously I think it succeeded in that it brought students into the world of the latest research in our time period in a way that if we had just relied on more traditional teaching, having students read secondary sources, read the textbook type material that was available, they wouldn't, I think, have felt that or understood in that really complex way what this multimedia period was, and then what this multimedia experience of the website is. So we felt that the time period, the latest research really matched the way a website works. And I think what was nice is that students feel so at home now in this type of multimedia website where they can click, click, click their way through things, that to get them to understand that that's the way the late 17th, early 18th century was working also. For people who are walking down the streets of London, they'd be seeing architecture, they'd be grabbing a ballad, they'd be buying a pamphlet, they'd be walking to a play. That an 18th century person walking down the street would be having a multimedia experience very similar to clicking through a website. So we felt that was a success, getting them to really almost viscerally enact the latest research of the time period. The second thing we thought the website enacted was this interdisciplinary idea that Malcolm and I had. It's very rare to be able to teach an advanced course in an interdisciplinary way. And we thought we'd try it, try to make it work, and we felt that the best way for that interdisciplinarity to be enacted was, again, through a website where the two of us were side by side at the front of the classroom. But we think that this idea of bringing history and literature together really came alive when students had to do it themselves for the website. That you can see from these pages that the pages all contain historical material and literary material and visual material, artistic material, factual material, all multi-layered. So we could stand up in front of that classroom for an entire semester talking about being interdisciplinary, but there's something about doing the website that students had to enact that bringing together of different disciplines. And again, we thought that very much worked, and from what the students were saying, it was really when they had to sit down and do the website work that those pieces started to click for them. And then the third point I wanted to make about the student activity in the classroom was just that, as I think you can tell, this became very engaging for them. And so I would say, I think our sort of gut sense that doing this type of project is engaging. I think when we get those student evaluations, we'll find that to be borne out in what the students actually say. I think that when you compare a website, even though it was maybe shorter than a traditional research paper that a student would be writing, when you compare one of those websites with all of the materials the students had to find to pull together, when you compare that to the traditional research paper that they did write as their final paper, but when you compare the website to the traditional research paper, I think you can see how much more engaging the idea of research is to students when they're producing something like this. So where our current research is we're becoming, as researchers, much more facile and much more capable of working through electronic databases, uncovering primary resources, working with visual imagery ourselves. That's really where scholarship is evolving to. And again, what a better way for students to engage with that and to find that exciting than through a website rather than through a traditional research paper. So I think we'll find that idea of scholarly research, that the students will feel that they were much more engaged in it through the website than they are through the traditional research paper that they are writing right now because it's due next week. But we'll see what they have to say about this work as being a new type of research and actually a more engaging type of research. I think what we have to do a lot is we have to play around with primary sources as researchers. And you can see that this website is all about primary sources in a way that many of our more typical research papers are not so research-based in terms of primary sources. But students really had to go out and find some interesting material. So I would say that looking at the idea of multimedia, interdisciplinarity, and then just the idea of student engagement in research, those were sort of three almost pedagogical or philosophical goals that we had for the class. And I would say that's the thinking that underlies the website from a teaching perspective. And I felt, having thought about that ahead of time and then actually playing it out over a semester, that it actually did work. And we'll see what the students say.
Yeah. Two just quick comments to add to that. One, it's a good sign, I think, that the English department has its own little in-house student conference, and 3 of our students volunteered to put together a panel to present their web pages to their fellow students.
Tomorrow. They're going to present tomorrow. And they were so excited about the research. And they're going to be the only true multimedia presentations at our English department graduate student conference. Most other students will be reading a straight paper, but they'll be able to walk the rest of the audience through this type of research. So I think that'll be a very popular panel.
The other comment is that the other interesting thing, or nice thing about a website is that it's so open-ended. I almost wish I'd done this earlier in my career, but it's the kind of thing where if we teach this course again, we'll have everything, including what the students have put on. We'll add to that. We're hoping other people will pick this up and adopt and adapt, maybe use parts of it for different courses with different emphases. It is, of course, publicly available. And it'd be interesting to see if that happens, and if so, what happens to the site as it evolves in this way. Lisa,
Do you want to talk a bit about?
Do you have a minute or? Just really quickly. First, thank you so much for all the work that you've done on this project. It's really been a privilege for us to get to work with you because people say, oh, can we make me a website? But it's not just, you can put up a frame, but it's very unusual to have somebody come and put so much time into it. And I think that's what shows it's the content production that makes the difference between just, we can put up anything technologically, but it's putting the hours weekly over a year, 2 years, to fill it in, and that really shows that it's really been exciting for us. Also, we want to thank our boss, Jim Wise. This part of this project behind the scenes was a technological pilot project. And your timing, actually, if you'd done this earlier, it might not have been as effective because now the technology is actually caught up to the ideas. We used what's called our boss actually discovered and implemented what's called a content management system called Expression Engine, which allows the users, the publishers, to manage their own materials much more easily than 5 or 6 years ago. And he found, and the price has come down, so it was something that was easy to pilot and use at a more affordable price than maybe 10 years ago, where it would have been out of reach. So we were really, it was very exciting for us that our boss, Jim Wise, found it, so we want to acknowledge what he did. And Bandhavi, who's our full-time programmer, actually graduated from the master's degree, and in his full-time working in IT, did so much of the technical setup to make Expression Engine work well. Another thing, as far as what's been exciting for us and different in this project is we were, by our boss, given permission to really make it more of a personal space. We're talking about personalized learning rather than putting it into some generic template. And I think there is this quality of difference when you're in a system visually that's sort of a generic kind of template of some system with some corporate brand or universe something versus really trying to, we were given, and this is unusual, the freedom to make a unique visual learning space online. So as you can see, it does look different than other things out there. It's more like making a publication rather than maybe making a marketing device. So that was exciting and for me, from a designer perspective, it was very exciting and so it is a little different than other things. And finally, another thing that's really caught up that's exciting, if you have questions about, is the Google mapping technologies out there. Again, you had perfect timing, because when Malcolm first approached us, he had all sorts of ideas about mapping, and it's just that all these programs are being come out that are affordable or almost free to build on what Google has developed in mapping to make interactive and customizing of unique mapping available. And just a shout out to thank people in instructional technology, Irene and Eileen, and Teddy, I don't know if they're all here, who talked to us about some of the Google stuff early on. Teddy did some help with the Google helping with some assistance. So there are a lot of, it's a team effort in whenever you do a project, and so if I left anything out, Bandhavi, you want to say a couple words? And if you have questions, happy to answer. Do you want to say a couple things?
I just want to add that I am really glad to be part of such a big project, and especially the London website is the first project in which we designed like an expression engine. And later, now, most of the UMass departmental websites are being done in Expression Engine, so it's been a great learning experience for us all through it.
And it's hard sometimes when you're the pioneer. We asked Malcolm, he's such patience, because I actually had Malcolm doing hand coding things because we were experimenting with how we were implementing it. So now there's a lot more easy stuff, but Malcolm actually had to come behind the scenes and do, especially getting and we were upgrading as we went along. So as we got the software up to date, things have gotten better. So we're very appreciated by the patience shown with that aspect of the project.
Lisa was great at making me little online manuals for how to do it, so I could refer back to them.
So it's been really fun and educational. It's exciting. We're going to put out historic London. All those pictures, I think, is really, I'm dying to hear the student evaluations personally. Like, we're really interested because it was such a pilot project for us on a lot of different levels.
And I would just say, if you go and play around with the site, I think you'll see just how amazing some of the technology is, that you can actually manipulate maps and how densely layered some of the material is, that it's got the visual and the audio, and the idea of if you want to go into a portfolio of different images. It's very, I felt like it was just so much more sophisticated than what the original idea was.
The URL is in your session descriptions, not on the agenda that's the one page, but in the longer session descriptions you'll find the URL for the website. So,
There's a couple of questions
yeah,
way
I
in the
want to
back.
make sure about questions.
I just have a quick question about Caterpillar. This is absolutely beautiful, and it displays beautifully on Internet Explorer. Does it work well with Firefox and Safari as well?
Yeah. I mean, part of our process is we have to cross, everything we design has to cross-platform test. So.
Yeah, I think there are a few little glitches where going through the navigational tools, sometimes you'll get to a subsidiary page and it's hard to get back to the first one in Firefox. But mostly it works well.
Did you have any problems with copyright clearance, especially with some of the maps and all the wonderful photographs, and how did you get that?
It's come up more recently with the student stuff, partly because I was hurried, seeing if I could grab stuff without having to write. Over half the images, I think, come from the Yale Center for British Art. Yale waives copyright fees and gives you the reproductions at very reasonable costs. So we were able to get a lot for our money that way. There were some things we would have liked to use that we didn't because we felt the copyright fees were exorbitant. Museum of London, in London, for example, was asking something like $250 an image for copyright. We just said, no, that's beyond our means. There I'm anxious to go to this session this afternoon because there are issues, I guess, with what's on Wikimedia, where Wikimedia says it's in the public domain. Can you really trust them?
It's exceptional to be, so I you said so interesting, I think I was just curious that, you have to deal with that reality part of it.
Yeah, no, it is. We got about $6,000 from the president's office, and about almost $3,000 of that went for the 3 ballots. And because we had to pay the musicians. But then most of the rest that we've spent has gone for the actual images and the copyright, $50, $25 a shot for some of these images.
Did I hear you say that this is a graduate class?
Graduate.
Would this be appropriate for an undergraduate class?
I used one of the pages in my undergraduate class this semester. But yeah, I think we could use it at the
It
undergraduate
seems to
level.
me that creating the web pages where they're doing their own research might be more problematic for students who have less practice.
Yeah. Probably take more editing. I think the nice thing about a web page, especially for a student in a master's program, is that it is a kind of publication, but it requires a lot less than a journal article, for example, and there's a lot less vetting involved. So it gives you that sort of intermediate step that's approachable and accessible. But yeah, for the undergraduates, you have to be a fairly good undergraduate, I think, to do it well.
Well, thank you tremendously.